and I want to welcome you today to our NEH application writing workshop. I know many faces in the room, but for those of you I don't know, I'm Kate Pekoski-Kulkarni. I'm the Director of Strategic Research Initiatives here at the university. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all today to this workshop. Our goal is to offer insight into the process of applying for NEH funding opportunities and provide valuable information on best practices in preparing a competitive proposal. I hope you all leave today with useful information and new tools that will help you understand the NEH process and write and refine successful applications. Today's event is a collaboration between the Office of the Vice President for Research and Innovation and the Oregon Humanities Center. While we differ slightly in our size and our scope, we are both equally committed to supporting faculty in pursuing excellence in their scholarship and research. The Oregon Humanities Center, who you'll hear from a bit later today, offers fellowships to both students and faculty to support individual research projects and also curriculum development activities. And they also offer a stellar public program, range of public programs that bring leading scholars here to campus. I'm here representing Research Development Services, one of the many departments under the Office of the Vice President for Research and Innovation. We support all of the UO faculty through our internal funding programs and coordination of limited submission opportunities like the NEH Summer Stipend Program. We also work one-on-one with researchers to help identify funding mechanisms to support their work and subsequently collaborate with faculty to develop clear and compelling research narratives. I'm relatively new to the university, and I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to meet so many of you today. I hope this is the beginning of many collaborations between all of us. Now that I've introduced you to the sponsors of today's workshop, I think it's time to get on to the main event. I'm so pleased to welcome Dr. Dan Sack, Senior Program Officer in the Research Division of the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Director of the Summer Stipend Program. Dan is a historian of American religion with a PhD in religious studies from Princeton University. He has taught and served as an administrator for several universities, including the University of Chicago, Hope College, Columbia Theological Seminary, and the Associated Colleges of the Midwest. He is the author of 2 books, White Bread Protestants, Food and Religion in American Culture, and Moral Rearmament, the Reinvention of an American Religious Movement. He's currently working on 2 projects, one on religion in the Great Depression, and another examining airport chapels as sacred space. We are so delighted to have Dr. Dan Sack here with us today. Please join me in welcoming him.
My first job out of college was as a desk clerk at Timberline Lodge. As a boy from the suburbs of the flatlands of the Midwest, a year in the Cascades was transformative. And so I'm thrilled to get a chance anytime I can to come back to Oregon. And it's great to be here in Oregon, to remember those wonderful places, but also to be here with you all today. Most of our work at the NEH is mediated through email or paper applications, and it's a particular joy for me to talk to real people about projects they get excited about. And so we love the chance to visit campuses and talk with colleagues about what they're excited about and find ways to help them support it. I'm very grateful for the folks here at the university, particularly Kate and her colleagues who have made this happen, and for all of you who have taken time out of your very busy lives to be with us here today. So it's great to be here. The goal for the day, as Kate has said, is to talk about the NEH review process, to talk about grant programs, to inform you better about how things work, and to help you think about how your work might connect with ours. There'll be a chance to ask lots of questions along the way, and then conclude with some suggestions on how to write a strong application. Here is what you really need to know. First of all, NEH programs are, as you know, very competitive, but you will not get a grant unless you apply. And I'm here to encourage you to apply. Secondly, your application will be more successful if you read the guidelines. And we'll talk more about what the guidelines are and what they include. Third, you should know that you should call us at the NEH. NEH program officers are there to answer your questions. Unlike many foundations, we are not a black box. If you call us, if you email us, you will hear back from us. If you've got a question, we will do our best to answer it. That is why we are there. The NEH and the NEA were established by Congress in 1965. Here's an outline of the kind of work that we do. We support work that engages a wide variety of audiences with the humanities, believing that they offer the key to understanding our world today. We are, of course, a federal grant-making agency supported by taxpayers, which means thank you very much. And we endeavor to be good and careful stewards of the taxpayer funds we have available to us. Since the endowment is a federal agency, you may assume that we are all bureaucrats. That is true. However, we are also all humanities professionals. All NEH program officers are humanists of some sort, teachers, scholars, museum professionals, library professionals, filmmakers, whatever. So we are all coming with a perspective in the fields out of which you yourself come. Many of us still have active academic scholarly research records. This means that we are like you. And if you've got a question, you can contact us and we will know where you're coming from. We will understand what's going on in your career. We want to be your allies. This may seem fairly obvious, but the NEH's work focuses on the humanities. We do not support the creative arts. That's our colleagues at the NEA. We do not support humanitarian work. We rather focus on the humanities. We work with a fairly capacious definition of the humanities. This is what our founding legislation, how it defines those. Notice it's quite a range of things, including social sciences employing humanistic methods. It's a pretty broad category, and sometimes we do find ourselves talking about what precisely is this a humanities project. The NEH does its work through 6 grant-making divisions, each one focused on a different kind of audience or different kind of purpose. I'm going to run through them today, each because there's a variety of people in the room with a variety of interests, and so you may find something in each of the divisions that will be of interest to you. I'll do it pretty quickly so as not to get too bogged down. There are more details on all of these grant programs in the handouts, which are just outside the door there. We'll start with the Division of Research Programs, which is where I am based, because it may be the area which a lot of you faculty must be particularly interested in. The division supports the work of scholars, working individually or in teams, doing research for scholarly and general audiences. The division offers 8 programs split into 2 families. Some of our programs are designed for individual scholars. These are the only individual grants made by the endowment. Others are for teams of scholars who are doing a bigger thing that requires bigger budgets. The division grant programs support the work that scholars do, research and writing to produce books or other materials that will have an impact on scholarship in their field. All of these projects have to be based on original research and have some kind of interpretive approach. They need to make an argument or contribute to scholarly discussion. And the work can result in a variety of kinds of output, ranging from articles, monographs, editions, whatever. The division's programs include the fellowship, which is probably the NEH's best-known program. I don't know why it did that. This is what most people mean when someone says, oh, she got an NEH. This usually means the fellowship. The fellowship supports 6 to 12 months worth of work for an individual scholar who's doing a project, $5,000 a month or up to $60,000 a year. That's an April deadline. It's an annual grant. Our summer stipend program is similar for 2 months worth of support, again for an individual scholar doing something, $6,000 for those 2 months, and that application's deadline is late September for the following summer. Our newest program, Public Scholar, is now in its 4th year, supporting projects that are aimed at general readerships. So written by scholars, informed by scholarship, but written for general readers. Why is this happening? Sorry. Like the fellowship, 6 to 12 months worth of support, up to $60,000. For this one, you need to have a record of writing for general readers and need to include a writing sample. The collaborative research is for teams of scholars who are doing a bigger thing. So maybe they're doing an archaeological dig, or they are writing a book together, or doing some sort of data mining of some of the sort. But this is at least 2 scholars, but it can include a bigger team, including international scholars. It can include graduate students, and will include travel and equipment and all of that kind of stuff. 1 to 3 years, up to $100,000 a year. Scholarly editions and translations is for teams of scholars who are making a edition or translation of primary documents for scholars or general audiences. These are often very long-running projects. The Mark Twain Project at the University of California has been going on for about 30 or 40 years. The Adams Family Papers, going on since 1950 or so, will go to about 2040 or 2050 because they have that much stuff. But these are great projects. Again, they are doing annotated editions, either digital or in print. Here are a few recent grants given to local scholars in these programs, including a fellowship and a public scholar grant, a summer stipend, and a scholarly edition. Any of these people in the room, by the way? Okay, they're off doing good work somewhere. Also want to make you aware of another program. If you're interested in research, you should know about the fellowships that we sponsor at independent research institutions, like, for instance, the Newberry Library in Chicago, or the American Antiquarian Society, or the American Academy in Rome, or the Institute of Indian Studies. So we give grants to those places that then invite scholars to come work in their collections in their place. So you apply directly to those places using funds then that we provide. So if you're looking to do a research in one of those places, there's about 30 centers around the world, check out this program. These are tremendous opportunities. Now moving to the Division of Education programs. So these are programs for people who are involved in classroom teaching, either K-12 or college level. Our grantees here are institutions like colleges, libraries, or museums, and they're doing a variety of enrichment programs for teachers. Generally, these programs bring together teachers for to engage a substantive humanities topic and find ways to bring their engagement into the classroom. Generally, you can think of this as professional development or curriculum development. Best known here are the summer programs, these summer seminars and institutes, again for either college level or K-12 teachers. This brings together groups of teachers together for common reading, common discussion, leading either to their own research or development of new classroom materials. These are amazing professional development opportunities. It is great to talk with people who've talked about how these experiences have changed the way they teach, have changed their careers. So these programs are every summer. The application deadline for those is this year, the 1st of March. You apply directly to the program rather than apply to us. So if you go to our website, you will find the list of programs for this coming summer. So if you want to do this, get on this soon, because the deadline is the 1st of March. If you think that you or a group of your colleagues have something worth sharing with other teachers and want to lead one of these, you can apply to the program to teach for the following summer. So apply this March for summer 2020. but this is a chance to bring together colleagues to share information that you think is worth sharing. Humanities Connections is fairly new, another program for teachers. This aims to expand the role of the humanities and the undergraduate curriculum at 2- and 4-year institutions. These grants support the development and implementation of new curricular opportunities, often cross-discipline or even cross-school within a university, focused on significant humanities content. So these are focused around a common topic or theme, and they can include collaboration with people in other departments, also with people in professional schools within your university. They also include student engagement opportunities like internships, student research, or civic engagement. This is fairly new, but having some really great impact. Here are a couple of institutes, one here at U of O and one at Oregon State. I also want to make you aware of the Educations Division Excitement program. This is a web collection of teaching materials, largely aimed at K-12 teachers, but some folks do use it on the college level. Teaching plans, digital archives, films, photographs, etc. Some cases just a one-session thing, some cases an entire semester worth of materials. If you are teaching, this is a really great resource. If you have students who are preparing to teach, this is a great opportunity for them if they're getting ready to go out and do the student teaching materials. So Excitement has great materials to check out. Our Division of Preservation and Access, as the name would suggest, supports work that preserves and makes available documents and materials for general audiences and for readers. So these are grants that go to museums, libraries, archives, those kinds of things. So it supports lots of kinds of work. So digitizing materials, creation of databases, creation of reference materials like encyclopedias or dictionaries, the assessment of preservation activities. So if you've got an archive of materials and you need to think about how best to preserve those materials, you can get some grants here. Some of these grants go to like local historical societies who have a collection of stuff and they're trying to make sure it gets preserved. Here are a few examples. A digitization project working with illuminated manuscripts at the Walter Dog Museum in Baltimore, the Encyclopedia of Virginia, a Humanities Collections and Reference Resources grant. Fairly new here is the return to the NEH Challenge Grant, focused on infrastructure and capacity building in the humanities. So if you've got an institution that is doing big fundraising for a big goal of some sort and are looking for some ways to match that, this is a place to look. Here, for instance, is the Lake County, Oregon Library, which received a challenge grant to support the preservation of its building. So if you're creating humanities infrastructure, building construction, renovation, preservation of digital materials, some big project, and looking to do fundraising, this is a program to look at. Here are some recent Oregon grants. A preservation assistant grants here at the University of Oregon. Oregon Shakespeare Festival created a reference resource. A professor here at U of O also created a lexical database. Common Heritage. This is a fairly new but really cool program. So often done by either university or local historical society, encourages community people who have stuff in their attic to bring it out and share it. So it's kind of like an Antiques Roadshow kind of day, you know, you sort of, bring your stuff Tell us a story about it. We will digitize it and make it available to the general public. We might even do a storytelling day around the materials in a community. But this is a chance for people who've got great materials to share them with each other. Another great reference, particularly for folks who are teaching, Chronicling America. This is a collaboration with the Library of Congress and state institutions that is digitizing newspapers, ranging from the early 1800s up until the 1920s, digitizing and indexing newspapers from all over the country, and not like the New York Times or Washington Post. These are local newspapers. They're now doing immigrant newspapers in different languages. Think about what a great teaching material this would be. We gave a grant to the University of Oregon a couple years ago to start scanning and indexing Oregon newspapers. I don't know what papers they're working with, but this is a great teaching material for your students. Vision of Public Programs, as the name would suggest, is for engaging wide variety of audiences in the humanities. So applicants here are people who are making documentaries, or historic sites, or libraries, or museums of some sort. So if you are doing something that is looking to engage a broad general audience, this is the place to look. Grants from this division support the development and production of museum exhibits, community engagement projects, various kinds of media, and digital projects. The digital projects are fairly new, but really cool. So here, for instance, is an app that is tied to the GPS in your phone in the city of San Francisco, and you can wander around the city with this app, and it will show you what that place looked like once upon a time. So this is a chance to think about the history of housing in the city as you walk around. Media projects are a big piece here. Ken Burns is our poster boy. All of Ken Burns' films have been supported by the NEH. So a lot of the history documentaries, a lot of the literary documentaries you see in PBS are NEH supported. Again, here are a couple of grants to local projects. So a community conversation project at Oregon Humanities, a museum exhibit at the Portland Art Museum. Also, we support a program called NEH On the Road. So when a local institution creates an exhibit, this program will support the creation of a traveling version of that, which then you can travel then to small museums and libraries who otherwise would not have this material. So the Oregon High Desert Museum hosted an exhibit called Bison, which was one of the NEH traveling exhibits. Another teaching resource out of here, supported by the Public Programs Division, Created Equal, which is a portfolio of 5 NEH-supported documentaries on the history of the civil rights movement in the United States. Abolitionists, Slavery by Another Name, Freedom Riders, The Loving Story, Freedom Summer, and the newest one, Tell Them That We Are Rising. There are teaching materials on our site for all of these films. So if you're teaching at all in civil rights history, there's some tremendous resources there. Our Office of Digital Humanities gives grants to projects that are finding new ways to engage technology in humanistic work. Now, we support digital work across the endowment. So people who are writing e-books will get maybe support from our division. People who are making an app maybe get support from public programs. If you are looking to create a new tool or a new method in the digital space that is going to support the humanities, this is the place to look. This is sort of the cutting edge work in the humanities. Lots of grants in here. One of their programs is the Institutes for Advanced Topics in the Digital Humanities. Just a slide. So bringing scholars together to talk about and engage teaching and research materials using various new techniques. Here are a couple of recent grants in Oregon out of this program, including one here at the University of Oregon, a Humanities Startup Grant, an institute at Lane Community College, and Humanities Open Book, which is a fairly new program supporting the digitization of out-of-print humanities materials. As you may know, each state and territory has a Council on the Humanities, supported in part by the NEH budget. These organizations do work in their communities. They do programming, they do sub-granting, a variety of kinds of stuff, often engaging local community issues. I know Oregon Humanities Council is quite active. I'm hoping you'll find a way to connect with these people. They are always looking for ways to connect with the work of scholars. The best source for all the information about the NEH's work is on our website, NEH.gov. On that site, you will find information on all of our grant programs, information on how to apply for a grant. You will also find a database of all of the grants we have ever made. So if you want to know what grants have come to your institution or what grants have been made in your area of interest, check out that database and you can see what kind of work has been done. When you click on the grants button up there at top, you will find a list of all of our grant opportunities with links to the guidelines for all of those programs. And you can choose, you can filter that out by division, whatever. We're going to talk today about the NEH Fellowship Program. Use that as an example, in part because I think a lot of you will find that interesting, but also it's a good example, and the information really applies for all of the NEH programs. Each program page includes the same kind of information, although of course the information varies from program to program. It will tell you the application deadline, the funding statistics for that program, and who to contact in case you've got questions. Most importantly on this page, you will find the guidelines. The guidelines are the sacred scripture at the NEH. If you are thinking about applying for a grant from us, check out the guidelines. They're long and a bit bureaucratic, but they will tell you lots of good and useful stuff. They will tell you who is eligible and who is not. They will tell you what an application should include. They'll tell you how the process works. And they will tell you the criteria that will be used to review the application. I'll tell you a little more about that after a bit. Also on this page, you will find a list of frequently asked questions, a list of recent awards out of that program, and a bunch of sample applications. So you can see how somebody else made an application to that program, how somebody else made a case for their project and that work. Applications for NEH grants, like many federal grants, are made through a portal called Grants.gov. It will take you a little while to find your ways to maneuver around it, but it will pay off. If you've got questions, talk to your university administrators. They know how to do this, and they can help you navigate it. Grants.gov also has a very helpful, very friendly help desk. So if you call them, they will answer the question. They will answer the phone and answer your questions. That is, if you apply on time. Our application deadlines for all of our programs are 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. You would be stunned, or perhaps you would not be stunned, how many of the applications come in that last 3 hours. If you are applying, particularly for the first time, I strongly urge you to apply early. Because you may have a question and you don't want to get caught at the last minute. You may have a technical issue and you don't want to get stuck. Don't wait till last minute. Sometimes the system will crash because everyone's applying at 11:55. You know these things that you tell your students about papers, right? Read the assignments, pay attention to the criteria I'm talking about, and get it in on time. It's the same thing for grant applications. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But grants.gov, you have to register ahead of time. So if you're thinking about applying, register at least a week or two ahead of time because it's going to take a little while to get in. As you may know, all grants at the NEH go through a peer review process. Here's a little graphic depiction of that. We sort applications into appropriate, broad, disciplinary areas, and then we aim to find reviewers to help us read those applications. So our reviewers are folks appropriate to the application. So if it's one of the fellowship, we're going to be looking for scholars. If it's something in preservation access, we may be going to librarians or museum people. But we're trying to find the people with expertise in those areas. We're trying to find people who know how the NEH works. So often we're trying to get some previous grantees or previous reviewers. We are also trying to find the most sympathetic possible reviewers for your application. We avoid people who we know have an active agenda against our applications. We're trying to find people who will give us good and useful feedback. I am impressed by how generous our reviewers are. They take seriously every application that comes to them and spend a lot of time offering useful feedback. So whatever else you may think about the peer review process, know that the peer review process at the NEH is a congenial and supportive one. The panels will meet sometimes in person, or some cases they just post written comments for us for our review. After we get those comments, we look at all of the comments. We make a set of recommendations. The staff makes a set of recommendations to our board, who then makes the recommendations to the chairman of the endowment, who by law makes the funding decisions. So it's a multi-stage process, but throughout this, what the peer review panel says is taken very seriously indeed. It's a lengthy process, but it results in good review. It is not only a long process, but it is a competitive one. This is the scariest slide in the entire day. So for the fellowships program this past year, we received 1,059 applications. We funded 95 for a success rate of 9%. Summer stipends last year, we received 789 applications, funded 71 for also 9%. I know these are scary numbers. Please know those numbers are not because we are mean, nasty people. It simply reflects the limitations on our budget. Do not let these numbers scare you off from applying. And what I said at the beginning, you cannot get a grant unless you apply. But do enter in knowing it's a competitive process, and you need to be giving us a good, strong application. We will talk in the second part of the day about how to write a stronger application. Before I wrap this up, let me repeat something I said at the beginning. NEH program officers are fellow scholars. We do what we do because we want to support your work. We want to be your colleagues and allies. Please contact us with questions. If I don't know the answer to your question, I'll pass it on to a colleague who does. If you call us or write us, you will talk to one of these smiling people. We are there because we want to be helpful. We can answer questions. We can help you figure out the right program to apply to. In most cases, we will read drafts. Unfortunately, we cannot read drafts for fellowships and summer stipends because we get so many applications. But for every other program at the endowment, we do read drafts. Take advantage of that. Get us your draft at least 6 weeks ahead of time. We will send it back with commentary, with advice. Not tied to the final review process. It doesn't affect what the final review is, but we will get you comments back to you as quickly as we can, which will help you write a stronger application. So that's the beginning of the end of the first part of the session. We've got some time for questions and answers. I think Kate's going to wander around with the microphone. I'm happy to answer whatever I can. All the way in the back. Wait. Just mic's coming.
The collaborative research grant which
Yes.
you described, does that also address collaboration between different institutes?
Yes. So that grant is made to an institution.
Okay.
So like if you were going to be the director, the grant would be made to University of Oregon, you'd be the director, but then you could bring in whoever else you'd like to be working on the project, and they could be U.S. or international.
And what is the difference to the Humanities Connections grant?
Sorry?
What is the difference then to the Humanities Connections grant?
So Humanities Questions and Reference Resources?
Yeah, connections.
Yes. Oh, Humanities Connections.
Yeah.
That is a classroom teaching, curriculum development grant. So if
that's
you
good.
are
Okay.
looking to develop a set of courses around a particular topic, that's that. Right?
Before, when I had not won any kind of big award from any institution or any, organization, I was told that having won an award like that would be a good credential because it kind of shows that I, am good enough to win external funding and things. And then I was awarded one, and then people told me that actually, since I'd been awarded one already, then they would think, oh, she's already had one, we should give one to somebody that hasn't had one yet. So can you comment on whether it disadvantages you or advantages you?
It does not disadvantage you, particularly if you have completed a project and brought it to satisfactory conclusion. Hooray, that means that you can get stuff accomplished. And one of the criteria, as we'll discuss later, is the likelihood of successful completion of the project. So if you have already completed a project that is grant support, that is very much a plus. And having had one is not a prejudice against. Now, if it's grant for the same project, we need to talk about that because there are some sort of tweaks around that. But for a new project, that is not at all an issue. As far as, do you have to have had a grant before in order to get one? The answer is no. Certainly having had some sort of record helps, but it is not a requirement. Is that helpful?
Thank you. Supposing I were to write 3 grants, and one focused on American studies, one focused on European studies, and one focused on Asian studies, is there a hierarchy that
There is not.
NEH?
There is not. There is no preference for particular geographics or chronological or whatever, no. We are looking for, and I know this will sound somewhat vague, we are looking for the most excellent applications that we can across the board. I said to someone over lunch, some federal agencies do have particular agendas they're looking, so like the Department of Energy said, we're going to give all of our money to grants doing, X and the sort. We do not have those kinds of agendas. We're looking for the best applications that are being brought to us as opposed to asking people to do the research we want them to do.
For the research grants, is there a stage within a project that's the sort of the ideal stage from the perspective of reviewers and staff?
That's a very good question. Our language says that projects are supportable at all stages of their work. In practice, my experience has been that there is a sweet spot for a project that is sufficient enough along that you've done most, although maybe not all of the research, and you haven't yet gotten close to finishing it. So because the goal, projects are most successful if you know where this is going. So you've done enough research that you sort of have an outline, for instance, of what the book's going to look like, because that then gives the evaluators some confidence that you know where this is going. And yet, you're not so far along, there's nothing to do, right? A big key of this process, and I'll talk more about this in the second part of the day, is giving the evaluators confidence in you and in your project. That you know what you're doing, and you know where it's going, and you're going to be able to make it work. That's really crucial. And projects that have sort of reached that sweet spot are in a better position to give people confidence in that way. Does that make sense?
For the collaborative research grants, do all members have to be in the U.S., or could somebody be in a foreign country and still be able to get some
As long as the director of the grant is at the institution, at the grant receiving institution here in the U.S., they can hire other people from elsewhere to be part of the project. And that includes, there has to be at least 2 scholars, plus graduate students, expedition bus drivers, whatever. But yes, they can be international.
Hello, I just have a comment because I'm a research administrator at a small college locally, and I thought this would be important to share, but we had a person apply to the Public Scholar Program and get 3 excellents, but the topic was deemed too controversial to be funded. And that was stated clearly in the response, and I thought that'd be helpful for people in the room to maybe hear about what might be unfundable, even if you were actually doing if you did excellent work, but.
I will try to make this as simple as I can. Yes, we are a federal agency, and we are, of course, responsible to the President and to Congress about the grants that we make. I have been actually impressed in my 9 years at the endowment by the willingness to make often complex choices in that sense. However, given some of the current political awarenesses, our chairman likes to support projects that are timeless. He is somewhat anxious about projects that one could describe as being timely. I'm not sure I can say a great deal more about than that.
I thought maybe I could say something at least.
I mean, we are doing our best in that. It is a complicated situation, which frankly is a long-standing one. It's not just a current one. We are in better shape, for instance, than our colleagues at the NEA, who are often getting caught up in difficulties in this respect. We like to sort of keep our heads low on these kinds of situations. I mean, who cares about the humanities, right? I'm sorry to know that happened.
Oh, and it's
Yes.
not a complaint. I
Right.
totally understand. Even the NSF is a lightning rod for, controversy of people trying to cull the abstracts and find things. So I just thought it's helpful to know that, especially if I'm advising faculty, about their application,
Yes, and I will say that applicants make our job easier and make it easier for us to make awards if they are thoughtful about not pushing buttons in the way they write. Does that make sense? I mean, and I don't want to censor people about what they're doing, but we often see a project that said, if they hadn't said that, this would be pretty easy. But because they used that particular word, this is more complicated.
Thank you.
For projects that fall within the category of preservation and access, in particular digitization and digital archives, are there any restrictions with regards to the geographies that they would cover?
No.
And I'm thinking of geographies that sort of archival repositories in Latin America. Would the grants serve for those kinds of purposes, or do the archival repositories need to be based in the U.S.?
I believe, and we would need to check with that office, I believe that materials outside the U.S. can be included in that program.
Thank you so much for coming out here and speaking to all of us today. I had a question about recommenders because I've submitted a digital humanities grant unsuccessfully, and I'm looking towards some of the fellowship programs. And I'm wondering how to sort of strategize, because some of the programs say 2 people, and that's great, but others, like the digital humanities, leave that very open. And when I spoke to the officer, she really did suggest that I should get what seemed to me a very excessive number of recommendations. I thought that who wants to read 10 letters of recommendation? So I was wondering if you could speak to how we should be thinking about recommendations and recommenders for these types of programs.
Right. That's a very good question. In the research division, so we've talked a lot about those. For fellowships and summer stipends, we ask for, as you say, 2 letters. The other bigger grants, collaborative research and so forth, we ask not for letters. So just for fellowships and summer stipends, just 2. The question, of course, then is who? The first review criterion, and we'll talk about this in the second half of the day, is the intellectual significance of the project and its potential to have an impact on the work of other scholars. The best references are people who can make a strong case for the project on that basis, who are not making a case for you, but for the importance of the project. So the person who can write a letter that says, I know the field, I know this project is going to be really, really important, and it's going to change my scholarship in this way, or change the way that I teach in this way. So the person who can do that is your best policy reviewer. It needn't necessarily be a name. Given the choice between a big name who can be vague and a not so big name who can be more precise about the project, we much prefer the more precise comments. If you are doing a project that is cross-disciplinary, it's really great to have somebody from the different disciplines. So if you're doing sort of an art history and politics project, for instance, having somebody in each of those areas to make a case for significance in each of those areas is going to be really, really helpful. I don't know about what the digital humanities people are looking for in letters. I'm sorry you didn't get a better answer when you talked to them before. I don't really know about.
Really, really helpful. That
Okay.
was an area I was still kind of confused about
Right.
after the conversation.
Okay. Anything else? Way back here.
It's for the recording.
I was wondering if you could say a bit more about the Public Scholar Program and what kind of work should one do prior to applying to position oneself as a public scholar and to kind of be in a place where that would be a viable kind of grant to get?
Right. So the guidelines for that program ask that applicants have a record of public scholarship. We generally have identified that as a previous book for general readers, or some articles in, The Atlantic, or a couple of op-eds in the New York Times, maybe some blog posts that have been widely circulated, some record of having published in that kind of space for that kind of audience. So not just a university press monograph. So if it's, an Oxford Press thing that did get broadly reviewed, that would be fine. But some sort of record like that. The application also requires a writing sample to demonstrate that you've got sort of the style that fits there. Does that help? Anything else? All right, so we're going to take a break here, and probably, it's 4 o'clock, so come back about 4:10, 4:15. We will talk about the review process, demonstrate how it works, and then offer some suggestions on how to write a strong application. Oh, before we do that, we're going to talk about Oregon Humanities.
We can talk about organizations now or after.
This is fine. Oh, I see. I don't need this. I'm Paul Peppis. I'm the director of the Oregon Humanities Center. I should say that it's a common confusion. The Oregon Humanities Center is a research institute and a public humanities institute of the University of Oregon. Oregon Humanities is the state collaborator with the NEH, and that's located in Portland. They used to have a different name, and people often confuse us. We are not the same. The Oregon Humanities Center primarily does three things. We support research by faculty and students in the humanities internally. So we are the principal grant maker for internal research awards for faculty, grad students, and undergraduates in the humanities. We're one of 19 research institutes at the University of Oregon, the only one that's dedicated exclusively to the humanities and humanistic social sciences. Our definition of the humanities is very similar to the NEH's definition of the humanities. We're also a public humanities institute, so we sponsor our own themed named lecture series every year, and for those of you who are not from the University of Oregon, I hope you will partake of our public humanities programs. We are the principal co-sponsor for any humanities public program that takes place on this campus, and we are a co-sponsor for many, many scholarly visits from scholars in the humanities, symposia, conferences. Gordon Sayre has a big conference coming up in a couple of weeks. We're one of the co-sponsors there. And the third thing is we're an incubator for innovative new humanities undergraduate courses through our teaching fellowship programs. I'm very grateful to be here today. I'm extremely grateful both to the VP for Research and Innovation, David Conover. I want to say first about him. You may not know, but his office is the principal funder of all of the faculty fellowship programs that are administered through the Oregon Humanities Center. His office is the primary source of funding for all of our fellowships. We get two that are also funded by the provost, but the OVPRI is the main source of funding for our research programs, and we are always extremely grateful to the VPRI and his office for that ongoing generous support. I am personally extremely grateful to Kate, who is the new Director of Strategic Research Initiatives, for her instant collaborative outreach to us in the Humanities Center and the commitment that she has obviously already demonstrated to supporting research in the humanities. And I think it's important to understand that the VPRI's office really is committed to research at this university understood in the broadest sense. It's not just sponsored research that they want to support. They want to support all the research that happens on this campus. And that's a marker, that's a proof of that is the generosity that they give for our internal programs. But for the past 5 or 6 years, we in the Oregon Humanities Center have been working with the VPRI, with the Research Development Services, with the Divisional Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences in the Humanities, and the President's Office in a variety of ways to help build a culture among our humanities faculty to seek external grants. Dan mentioned that this is not something that we are trained to do as grad students, and one of the challenges that became clear to us that we faced was to try to help support, build this kind of culture of external grant seeking. So for the past 5 years, we've been trying to do this behind the scenes. A few years ago, we had a panel that we put together, which had some previous evaluators and previous winners of external grants talking to a group of our internal grant winners. But we've had as a goal, and as soon as Kate got onto campus, this was one of the things we wanted to start doing, which was our hope that we would institutionalize workshops like this as a regular event. And we are extremely grateful that Dan has been able to come to us. We're also very lucky because the window to get him here, because of the shutdown, there might be another one, so we're very fortunate that he was here. What's that?
And snow.
And snow, yes. So there were many things that could have stopped him, but we're very grateful that this has happened. We hope that this will become a regular event, and we want to continue to do everything we can at the Humanities Center to help encourage this kind of collaboration and to encourage you to do this work. And I should say, as Dan showed you, some of the recent winners from the University of Oregon who have gotten NEH grants, all of these people who have gotten these grants are previous winners of internal grants from the Humanities Center. And it's our conviction that if you win one of our grants, it's helping to train you how to write these grants, but it also is evidence of the excellence of the projects that you put forward. All of the people that he showed who are from the University of Oregon, almost every one of those has previously gotten a grant from us. So thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Dan, very much, and thank you, Kate.
See you back at 4:15. For our second part of today's workshop, so I mentioned at the end of the first session those fairly scary numbers about success rates and applications. Now, bear in mind, that is not because we're mean, nasty people. That simply reflects the limitations of our budgets and how much we can support. So, as I said, do not let those numbers intimidate you off from applying. You can't get a grant unless you apply, right? However, do enter in knowing it's a competitive process. So the goal of this next part of the day is to help you think about how to improve your odds, how to write a strong application. So we're going to demonstrate how this review process works, then I'm going to offer some suggestions on how to write a stronger application. We're going to focus today using as an example our fellowships program, in part because it's one I know well, in part because it's one a lot of you are interested in. But know that a lot of the process, a lot of the issues are similar across the board at the NEH, and probably are like what you're going to find at a lot of other funders as well. So what we're going to talk about today will be useful not just to think about the fellowships program, but also at the NEH more broadly, and for other funders in the humanities as well. As I mentioned at the beginning, the heart of what we do at the NEH is the peer review process. We ask scholars from across the country to help us evaluate the quality of applications to find the most excellent ones. We're going to demonstrate that process here today. The idea here being that you can write a stronger application if you understand how the peer review process works, who your audience is, and how all of this works. So we've asked 3 local faculty to join us, please up here, to demonstrate how this process works. We will do what we ordinarily do at a panel session. So, imagine that it is a warm, steamy Washington, D.C. July morning. We have gathered in a meeting room at the NEH to review applications to the fellowships program. And we start this, like we do with all of our meetings, with an orientation to what we do and how we do it. So we gather around the table, and I say, good morning and welcome to the Endowment and the Division of Research Programs. Many thanks for your work and your presence here today. The heart of what we do at the NEH is the peer review process. Our peer reviewers work to identify excellence in the humanities. That makes the work that you are doing here particularly important. Last spring, we received 1,100 fellowships applications. We have organized 35 review panels to help us identify the projects that will make the best possible use of taxpayer funds to support these projects. I then invite the panelists to introduce themselves to get a sense of who they are, what their fields of study are, and whether they have any previous experience with the NEH, either as a recipient of a fellowship or as a panelist. This allows them to have a sense of where the expertise lies around the table. So tell us, one by one, your name, your field, and any previous experience with the NEH.
Name, rank, serial number. Yes. I am Maram Epstein. My area of specialization is pre-modern Chinese literature. So I'm a total outsider on all three of these applications. I have won a summer NEH, and I have served as a reviewer.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Gordon Sayre. I'm in the English department here, and I had 2 NEH fellowships, but neither of them in this program. And I've served as a reviewer for ACLS, but not for NEH. And I'll pass it along.
Your field.
Oh, my field, thank you, is early American literature and colonial history and some Native American studies.
Good, thank you.
Hi, I'm Warren Ginsberg. I am a Knight Professor of Humanities in the English Department Emeritus, blissfully retired. My field is medieval literature, especially English and Italian literature. My experience with the NEH is, I think, perhaps instructive. I have not won an NEH. I did apply for an NEH. I didn't get it. The same year I applied for the NEH, I applied for a Guggenheim, and I got the Guggenheim. Exactly the same proposal. You have to keep applying. These things are they depend a lot on the makeup of the panel and whether there are certain biases or inclinations. I have reviewed for the Guggenheim for around 10 years. I've reviewed for ACLS as well as a specialist.
Good, thank you. The Fellowships Aims program is simple: to support the very best projects for significant research in the humanities. We ask our evaluators to use the same set of criteria when reviewing all the applications. And these applications are published in the application guidelines. Remember the guidelines I mentioned earlier? These are particularly important. These are the evaluation criteria for the fellowships program. Number 1, the intellectual significance of the proposed project, including its value to scholars and general audiences in the humanities. This is the first commandment all of us follow from this. If you can make this one, you're halfway home. If you can't, you're in trouble. Number 2, the quality or promise of quality of the applicant's work as an interpreter of the humanities. So, is this the right person for the project? This language, as you see, leaves room for people at different career stages. Number 3, the quality of the conception, definition, organization, and description of the project and the applicant's clarity of expression. So is it clear what they're going to do, and will this work? And we're trying to make sure the language avoids jargon. Number 4, the feasibility of the proposed plan of work, including, when appropriate, the soundness of the dissemination and access plans. So will this work, and will it get out to the audiences that the applicant has defined? And number 5, the likelihood that the applicant will complete the project. Not necessarily during the grant period, but do you have the sense, reviewers, that this project will get done at some point? You should evaluate each application as itself without trying to compare them or rank them to the other applications in this panel. You may know other things about the applicants, but the most important information is what is in the application itself. We ask our evaluators to assess applications on this scale, excellent to non-competitive, and to post comments in our online review system. They will use those comments when the panel meets and discusses them face-to-face. I also then use their written comments as I think about which recommendations to recommend, which applications to recommend. Our National Council on the Humanities, our board, and the chairman of the endowment will also read them. Most importantly, all panelists' comments are available to the applicants if they request them, whether or not they get a grant. Often applicants use these comments to strengthen their work. After the panelists post their preliminary comments, we list them by the initial grade point average in the agenda for the day. We start discussion with the top-ranked applications and work our way down, probably getting our way through about half of the applications. In each discussion, the panelists draw each other out on the application strengths and weaknesses. We encourage you to talk with each other. Be prepared to change your mind or have your own mind changed. That's why we bring you together. Our discussion is not aimed to get to consensus. We want your comments as individual evaluators. Once we discuss an application, then you'll have time to write final comments and a final grade. After the discussion, I then make recommendations to my colleagues about what application ought to be funded out of that panel. We take those recommendations and compare them with all the other applications in that program, trying to identify the best applications across the board. We make those recommendations on then to the chairman, to the National Council on the Humanities, which is a presidentially nominated Senate-confirmed body of 26 people in the humanities. They look at our recommendations. They make comments to the chairman of the endowment, who makes final funding decisions. It is a lengthy and complex process, but throughout, what gets said around the panel process is the most important stage. Everything that takes place during the panel meeting should be treated as confidential. Panelists should not discuss proposals, letters of reference, or comments of other panelists with anybody. Even the fact that someone has applied is confidential. You may discuss the review process itself and your experience at the NEH with others, but we ask reviewers to leave materials behind when they're done. The program officer's role is to encourage and facilitate discussion. I will see that issues that need to be addressed are discussed, especially those regarding significance, and raise questions as appropriate. Otherwise, it is entirely your discussion. My job here is simply to keep the group on task and on time. I'm not here to support or criticize any application. Any questions from you all about the process? Okay. So we pre-circulated 3 sample applications. I know that Kate sent those out. She has printed copies. Did anybody need a printed copy of the sample applications? All right, we'll let you do that. Alrighty, so we have these 3 applications with the names removed. Our panelists have read them and given preliminary grades. There was some agreement on some and some divergences on the others. The highest rated among the 3 was application number 2, American Music Global Messages, Building Bridges in the Cold War World. Warren rated this excellent, so I will ask him to start telling us what you liked about this application. And you can use the mic.
I wrote out my responses as well as giving the letter grade. So under intellectual significance, I had written This is a superb project. It integrates musicology, diplomatic history, political science, and cultural studies in a wide-ranging study of the goals and results of state-sponsored tours of American musicians to foreign countries during the Cold War. Both the subject and the way the applicant approaches it will appeal to an unusually wide number of audiences. Should I go through all of the? Number two, the quality of the applicant's work. Many chapters are based on already published articles. The applicant has expertise in both archival and oral research. The manner in which each supplements the other is one of the most appealing features of the project. Quality of conception. The proposal is compelling and clearly written. I initially worried that by viewing the subject from so many perspectives, the applicant would run the risk of not doing sufficient justice to each. By the end of the proposal, I was convinced she or he will blend them all into a narrative that will impress scholars and general readers alike. Feasibility, the project is large and ambitious. Based on work the applicant has already done, one has confidence that she or he will produce a work that will be published by a major university or commercial press. And for completion, I said see above. Number 4, based on the work the applicant has done, I see no reason to doubt that she or he will complete the study during the year on fellowship. I thought it was a superb application.
Good. Thanks for a good start. How about the rest of you? What do you think?
I agreed that this was the strongest of the three. I was especially impressed that the methodologies included both oral history or interviews and a lot of archival research, and there was a strong justification for how those two methods complemented each other. So I agree with Warren on that one. Also, the expertise in history and music both was such that I couldn't really decide what department or program I felt this applicant works in, and that showed a breadth of skills that's also pretty important. And also, I felt that this was likely to win because it had a kind of national and public-spirited purpose, and I think that it's important even if we try to avoid it being important. You know, just like the latest biography about the founding father generally wins the Pulitzer, you know. And it's not fair, but that's kind of what happens. And this proposal had that sort of nationalism, which I felt was in a good way.
I would add, however, in the criteria.
I understand, yes. But I've perceived this pattern over the years, so I felt I was getting it confirmed here. Mara?
I always seem to be the most critical of the three of us.
Actually not, but not always.
Okay, well, because we have served on a committee before together. The other two committee members were more impressed by the interdisciplinary nature of this proposal, which is both its strength, but I felt that it was neither fish nor fowl. I couldn't tell if it's a musical history, if it's being written for a political science audience as a form of soft power diplomatic history. I think it would be most successful as a general readership book, and I wish that the person had framed it as such. There are a lot of chapters that cover a lot of territory. I think for that reason it would make more sense as a general readership kind of book rather than a highly focused study. I can't tell if it's about genre study and reception, about how Americans view, if it's a discussion of how Americans decide what represents American culture. I thought there were way too many foci in this for one work, unless it is a general audience kind of book, in which case it would be fascinating to me. That's my preliminary comments.
All right. So you've heard what she said. Are the responses to each other?
Well, I had the same, I noticed the same things that Mara noticed. To me, they were virtues because I thought that the application itself presented the foci in an integrated way so that they were beginning to speak to one another. If you were going to examine this topic, I don't see how you couldn't have invoked diplomatic history, music history, all the kinds of approaches that the applicant, in fact, does mention and develop in the course of the 3 pages, which I thought was really quite a remarkable accomplishment. It made me feel that this was the sort of prismatic discussion that the topic actually needed and would certainly benefit from. As I said, I had the same initial worry that Marm, in fact, focused on, which was that the applicant was spreading him or herself so thin that you might not be able to do justice to each of the approaches. You know, it's the old problem between the general and the specific, the specialist and the more wide-ranging. I really did, however, think that the applicant managed to navigate these in a way that made me excited to read the study. I thought it was also an incredibly innovative approach to look at the tours that were arranged by the State Department of jazz musicians and other kinds of musicians from America. And I really appreciated the way that she also was aware about not only the directed mission from the State Department, but also the counter mission that sometimes occurred from the interactions of the musicians and the populations that heard them as well. I thought that was an important element in the application, which I thought it really appealed to me.
I agree that the details offered, or the little anecdotes and stories told in this application about the visit of the University of Michigan Jazz Band to La Paz, and in the 3rd page about the different jazz musicians. This, in only 3 pages, you don't have space to offer many of these illustrative details, but 1 or 2 is all you get, and if they really engage the reader and sound interesting, that's enormously important. And I felt that the second application, for example, didn't have those gems, those details that persuaded me.
As the non-American Europeanist on the panel, I have to say that one of the things that turned me off was the final sentence, which talks about cultural globalization, but frames it specifically within a U.S. perspective, and it really irritates me when Americanists take something American as representing global culture. But so the sentence is, I argue that by establishing face-to-face contact, enlisting ordinary citizens as diplomats, and cultivating musical interests that span great distances, the State Department sponsored tours of American musicians helped to create the international flow of culture now known as cultural globalization. Any of us who work in the pre-modern will push that back to the Greco-Roman earlier, whatever. But so that was just a little thing that irritated me. But
thank you for a good discussion. Who do you picture as the audience for this book? And because Miriam sort of got at this in her preliminary comments, but I'm interested in any thoughts on who's the audience for the book and what impact will it have on their work?
Me. This is the kind of book, if I were to read a review of it in the New York Review, I would go out and buy the book. I would really want to. I would really want to actually see. I think that this is it's a period of time that, for me personally, I grew up when all of this was going on, and I still remember coming to discover that there's this whole world of music out there that I hadn't known about, and then to discover that it had also this ideological mission attached to it, and putting it in the context of the United States at that time, and especially race relations and civil rights at that time. I'm of an age where I like the idea of revisiting that. It didn't hurt that I also am watching for the second time The Americans, and going through. But it really spoke to me. This would be a book that is completely outside my area that I would very much actually want to take a look at.
Any other thoughts on audience?
I agree. I think it'd be an interesting read. My ideal notion, or my notion of the ideal audience, is folks in the State Department or going through Georgetown in order to understand the importance of culture in diplomatic history and how complex and rich American culture is, and that not one of these musical genres defines what America is or what American is, and how clever the government was at that time to recognize that diversity is a strength. So I see, for me, the weakness of this proposal is that it didn't identify who the target audience is. And it's interdisciplinary enough that I could see that folks in poli-sci could very happily ignore it, and folks in music and music history could happily ignore it. I think it would contribute interesting things to both those fields. But the way that it is proposed here, I really think it's designed for a general audience, and I wish that it had made its intentions clearer.
One more question. I'm interested in how do you feel about the work plan, what she's planning to do during the grant period? Was that persuasive to you? It's towards the bottom of page 2, right under final product and dissemination.
Yes, this was one, she or he was running out of space. And, this had the most tacked-on feel for me of anything in the application. And, it's a timeline. If the applicant had also submitted a budget, it would be equally sketchy, I think. The reason why I did not find this too troubling was that the applicant said that there are a lot of articles that are already in print that are going to be the basis for some of the chapters. Now, that in and of itself can be a red flag, but I found that there was enough that wasn't also already in print that any university press would not have would have no difficulty, and then too much of it having already been put in print, besides which there would be revisions here. So I was a little troubled by the sketchiness of the plan, but I still felt that the applicant was going to be able to make a good deal of progress during the year that he or she would have on fellowship, and that eventually the book would certainly appear.
Good, thank you. Anything else?
I have to say that not having the CVs really disadvantaged us. I have no idea what this person's training is, and to what extent they are able to deal with nuances of musical genre. And So with all of them, I felt I wasn't really able to evaluate the competence of the person presenting the project or get a sense of how much had been published or how much groundwork had already been done. And I will say, for all of them, I felt that the timelines were just ridiculously unrealistic. But again, I work with sources that are hard to read, hard to get hold of, and maybe it is easier to write something like this.
That's a useful note, is that a full application package includes the narrative, a one-page bibliography, a two-page CV, and then the letters of reference. And the panelists use all of those different pieces to sort of make their evaluation based on those criteria. And I'll talk later on about sort of how those pieces work together, but that's a really helpful point. So before we go on to the next one, so after we have this discussion, then I ask the panelists to put in final comments and a final evaluation on the application. Now, we don't have the computers here in front of you, but based on this discussion, would any of you have changed your evaluation of the application? Okay. In some cases, that does happen. It just didn't happen here. All right. So let's move on to the next one. So this is the next one ranked is number 1. This is the Great Seljuk Sultanate and the Formation of Islamic Civilization, a Thematic History. We have quite a range of evaluations here, ranging from a very good to a some merit. Merit was the very good. So if you tell us what you saw as strengths here.
And I suspect I will be budged by everyone else's comments. Our university president and provost won't tell you this, but excellence is subjective. And I bring my own biases to projects like this. I found the proposal a little hard to get through because so many of the names, the history was foreign to me. But in some ways that makes me sympathetic because anytime somebody who works in East Asia tries to apply for a general fellowship, that process of translation puts an extra burden on the applicant. There's no way to make these names feel familiar or trip off the tongue. So what I liked about the project is that the applicant makes it very clear that this is foundational history that needs to be written. And the way that the thematic arrangement of the chapters would make it much more likely that this book will be used in courses and read for people looking for a historical take on particular topics. Obviously, histories of Islam and the relationship between state and Islamic Church are incredibly important right now. And I thought that the thematic arrangement of the topics provided a historical view on things that folks are trying to think through right now, and that would be of use to more liberal thinkers saying, look, we do have a history of this, and that the current interpretations of ISIS, for example, of the caliphate, is not the way it always was, and it is not the way it always needs to be. So I saw that this work also has political implications that could be important. What I didn't like, what I really hated about it, is the claim that a knowledge of numismatic history is all you need to write this. So the person emphasized his or her experience working with coins, knowledge of coins. I'm still not convinced that that's the only source text that you need to write this and why that's being foregrounded. And this is one of the ones where I really wanted a CV. So what are this person's linguistic competencies? What kinds of texts have they published on in the past or worked on? But in terms of opening up a whole new historical field, for me that was the significance of it.
I gave this a rating of good, I believe, and it is a big challenge for someone who works in a field like this that is obscure or esoteric to most of the likely reviewers on the general panel. There's a certain point that usually comes in the first or second paragraph where the applicant does what I call clearing the decks, which is claiming that this topic needs to be worked on because no one else has already done it. Usually I read that and I go, yeah, right. Because people will claim that we need another history of the Salem witchcraft trials. And I know that we don't. So this time, since I know nothing about this topic, I could believe the claim in the first paragraph. Experts may differ. Other weaknesses I've felt, it's very challenging for someone working in an area like this to present it to non-specialists when there are so many things that would need to be glossed and explained. So the conflicts between the Turkics and Arabic peoples and Persians, I felt I understood that. The Sunni versus Shiite, I felt I understood that. But then when it came to the Hanbalites and the Shifiites, I know nothing about it. But is there space for the applicant to gloss that? Probably not. So it's a big challenge. And the strange phonetic writing makes it seem more opaque, but I'm not sure if you want to drop that and use a more anglicized way of writing it. So I felt the applicant did a pretty good job at overcoming these major barriers. But the weaknesses I felt were ideas that were presented or concepts that were presented as well-established and well-known, even though the whole topic supposedly is so little studied. So when on the first page it refers to Islamic political thought, what is that? And then later on the second page, Islamicate settled society. I felt these concepts should be at least cited to a source if the applicant believes that his or her colleagues understand what that refers to. I felt, contrary to what Miriam said, I felt that did provide evidence of expertise in the last bottom of the third page, and doesn't really claim that numismatic evidence is the primary source here, although doesn't give us a good idea of what manuscripts, what archives, what collections of historical documents may have been published and where and when. That may be in the bibliography, but it's not here in the text.
I rated the first two categories good and the last three some merit. I was not as impressed with this application as I was with the others. For the intellectual significance, I said the Seljuk Sultanate is undoubtedly important. And I should say, this is in my area insofar as medieval is my area. But I was trained at a time where the perspectives were so narrow that we knew that something important was going on in the Islamic world. In fact, it was going to be the source of all the flowering of scholasticism, but we just were not trained. So in some ways, I was reading this and saying, wow, that's very, very interesting, and why didn't I know about it more than I did? It is undoubtedly important. The applicant, however, tries to magnify the significance of his or her study by claiming that Islamic civilization was formed, quote unquote, during it. In the proposal, however, she or he never demonstrates how present-day attitudes, structures, institutions, and so on are in fact legacies of the period. I thought there was a disconnect between the claim and what actually appeared. I didn't get the history of it all, what happened then and how it is now reflected in some of the institutions or attitudes. The quality of the applicant's work, I really agree with Meher. I wish I had had a CV to know exactly whether this was a younger scholar who is just starting out, in which case this is an extremely ambitious project, a huge history of a very important period, and that might have raised some doubts in my mind. The quality of the conception, though, this is where I really thought that the proposal fell down. The applicant proposes to write a thematic history. A number of chapters, however, seem simply descriptive. If there is a theme, it was not always clear from the summaries. The applicant also says that she or he will incorporate numismatic evidence, which sounds interesting, but doesn't explain how she or he would integrate it into the project. All it is, as far as I could tell, was mentioned. Numismatic history is very important, but I wish there were one example of what we could learn from coins that we couldn't learn from other sources. Moreover, I found the proposal extremely poorly written, which turns it off in my eyes right from the start. The profligate use of dashes, just to give one example, often complicates sentences to the point of confusion. As for feasibility, the project is ambitious. The applicant's thematic approach, however, at least from what one can gather from the proposal, raises doubts about whether the history will be detailed enough to be fully persuasive, and also for completion. The scope of the project does raise doubts, at least in my mind, whether the applicant, and here, I said can complete it during the fellowship period, but less so perhaps than completed at some particular point. I think a good deal could be done during that time, but certainly it could not be completed during that 1 year.
Do you have comments to each other's thoughts?
So I actually didn't think that any of the three proposals was a winner. And if I were going to give advice to this person, particularly based on what Warren said, and this is advice I give myself and to anyone working in non-European American fields, this person does have way too much information so that the narrative gets lost. The information and the names and all that persuaded me that the author knows this history, but they're not doing a very good job of selling it. And I wish that they had just stripped out a lot of the details and gone straight to what Warren asked for, which is, so give us a little bit of the historical snapshot and then tell us what the legacy is. And I think that would have made it much easier for the readers to remember what it's actually about, because if you ask me anything about it now, I can tell you thematic history, but no details beyond that. And so, yeah, throwing in a couple of anecdotes that will convince your readers you know how to tell a story and that the story is going to be interesting enough that people want to read it, help sell the project.
Yeah, I'd agree with the last thing you said there, Marm. This needs to have those representative anecdotes and doesn't really have them. And that's one way that you can make esoteric or obscure field come alive to non-specialists.
Did you have a sense of how, sort of what the scholarly context, what she, I think I'm fairly certain that she, was sort of, what scholarly conversations she was looking to engage?
Once again, I thought that the scholarly conversation, she did, let's call her she, I think she did demonstrate the need, if I were a specialist reader, that said, I think this history can supply something that's missing in the field, that it has tended to be overlooked. That I think did come through. What I didn't like was what I thought was more like a tacked-on relevance for today that came. So, how you navigate that specific scholarly audience and then the more general readership, or in the minds of the applicant, this second review panel, not comprised of specialists in the field, but the people who are just humanists, I didn't think that the application actually navigated the gap between those two audiences very well.
There's one more question, as I asked about the other one. What were your thoughts on the work plan here? What did, this is at the very big bottom of the last page. How did you feel about what, again, I think she plans on doing during the grant period?
I find it's hard to make much out of these estimates. Some people have superhuman work skills and can produce very quickly. Most people can't. Some people apply for grants for the same project time after time, and some win them time after time and never finish it. So if you knew the person and had the CV, it might give me some more to go on, but it didn't really have any judgment.
This one I thought was the most ridiculous in its time frame. So this person is writing a synthetic history that has not yet been written, so there are pieces of it that are out there. I wasn't too sure what's new, so in terms of the conversation, it didn't tell me how it fits into the field, other than that this field does not yet have a synthetic history, and it is needed. But given that she seems to be working primarily with primary texts rather than existing secondary scholarship, there's no way you could do this in a year. But the fact that there is a contract out there means it will get done eventually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there really isn't a plan. There's the contract that's been, an advanced contract with Cambridge University Press, which is impressive, and it's the kind of detail that always should be included in any sort of application. But yes, you're taking a flyer if you give this application a fellowship on whether it's going to be completed during the time that anybody will remember having read the application in the first place. The fact is that the applicant says that she has been working for the last 4 or 5 years on all the material and has a complete command of the primary matter, resulting in 4 published articles, 3 encyclopedia articles, and numerous conference presentations. That struck me as identifying the applicant as perhaps in the beginning phase of her career, or just not too much more advanced than that. 4 articles over 5 years is something, but it's not a great deal of output. And it made me wonder whether such a huge undertaking as this synthetic history is going to actually be able to be produced.
Anything else about this application? Okay. So, based on the time, I think we're going to take a pass on Tocqueville for this one, because I'm not sure, I think we want to move on to the rest of this. So I'm going to thank the 3 of you for this discussion. Now I will tell you the shocking news: all of these applications were funded. Now some of you may say, this is horrible malpractice. Some of you may say, hey, I can do that. The truth is, I cannot give you an application that was not funded, and so because those unsuccessful applications are not shareable. The conversation that happens here, however, is very much how our conversations go. They ask hard questions of each other. They talk about exactly these kinds of issues based on the criteria that we have given them. So based on this, then, I can share some thoughts about how to write a good application yourself, but I'll invite you folks to take your seat, and thank you very much. Okay, so this is the bit that you folks have probably come for. The mock panel gives you an idea of how our panelists consider applications, the kinds of conversations they have with each other, the way they engage each other. This gives you a slightly better sense of audience and process. Now, as I said, this was for our fellowship program, but all the other programs at the NEH work in a very similar kind of way. They may use different criteria, but the general kind of conversation, the general process is very much the same. So whatever you're applying for, think about this is the kind of way your application is going to get read and going to get discussed. Now, of course, bear in mind, these folks, as they said at the beginning, are not specialists in any of these areas. A real peer review panel would be disciplinarily based, and so you'd have people, the Sultanate application would have gone to a bunch of Middle Eastern specialists who probably would have known that scholarship better than we did, the same kind of way. But at least gives you a sense of how this works. So as you start to think about your application, keep this in mind. As I said, this is the case for other programs with the NEH. This is also, frankly, the case at other kinds of funders. They will work with a very similar kind of process, ask very similar kinds of questions. So as you're thinking about other applications, this will be helpful. So I'm going to share some application tips with you. There is a handout on the table out there, which I hope you picked up. If not, you can get it on the way out, that summarizes a lot of what we're doing here. So, as your faculty development or grant office people will tell you, you should think about grant seeking as a multi-year process. You should think about your application in the longer-term trajectory of your career. Don't make plans to do it the night before. If you've got a research leave or a sabbatical coming up in 2 years, you should be thinking right now about getting grant support. The grant process, as I said, is lengthy, and you may not get a grant the first time you apply. So you should apply, as we say in Chicago, early and often. Here are a couple of things you can do to lay a foundation for a successful grant application. First of all, make sure you're applying to the right grant program, that you are eligible, and that your project fits. As I said, the NEH website has descriptions of all of the grant programs. They will tell you what's eligible, who's eligible, what fits, what does not. If you are not sure where your application fits, call a program officer. They can help you think about where your application should go. You will submit your application through a portal called Grants.gov. It's worth your time checking it out ahead of time so you know how it works. If you're applying for an individual program, fellowships or summer stipends, you'll submit that application yourself. If you are applying for an institutional grant, all the rest of them, that application will be submitted by your grants office. So work with them about getting ready for that process. And you'll need to register for that site ahead of time, so plan ahead for that, and they have a really helpful help desk if you've got questions. Look at the guidelines. Like I said, they're lengthy and a bit bureaucratic, but they can be your friend. They will tell you what is eligible and what is not, what an application should include. They will tell you how to access and use grants.gov. Most importantly, they will tell you the criteria that evaluators will use when reviewing your application. Those criteria vary a bit from program to program, so make sure you're using the right one and for the right year. The website also contains samples of previously successful applications. That's where these came from. Do not use them as a model. As we've seen from this discussion, there is no perfect application. But use them as an inspiration for how somebody else made a case for their project. They can help you think about structure and form. Talk to program officers. That's what we're there for. Ask us questions, discuss ideas. We can read drafts for most programs except for fellowships and summer stipends. The application is a tricky document. It is a different genre from a journal article or a book proposal. We were not taught how to write them in graduate school. You should think about the application as a rhetorical enterprise, making a case for your project. Start with the review criteria. I've said this before, I'll say it again. The criteria are essential. Print them out. Staple them to your forehead. Keep them always in the front of your mind as you're writing your application, because that is what your reviewers will use when reading them. That's how they will be evaluating your application. You should be making a case for your project based on all of those criteria. It might be you want to even specifically flag places in your application where you're addressing one of those criteria. So for instance, you might say, this project is significant because, or I will disseminate the application in this way. This can be really helpful to reviewers who are reading lots of applications. It will help them understand what you're trying to do. For almost all NEH grant applications, almost all grant programs, in one form or another, the most important criterion is significance. Tell your reviewers why the project is important and how it will change the field that you're working in. You might start thinking about that by thinking about audience. Who needs to read this book, and how will it change the way they do this, the way they understand the field, the way they do what they do, whether they're scholars or teachers or whatever? Think about audience helps get you at making a case for your project's significance. Another way to do that is to think about context, scholarly context. Who else has been doing work on this topic? How is your work building on that or challenging that? Now, you don't have time and the space in this little short application for a full literature review. But you would have space for a paragraph or 3 sentences to say that the classic work on this is so-and-so, who does this, and so-and-so does that. I'm going to challenge that by doing this. Or I'm going to build on their method by doing that. That gives your evaluators a sense of how you're engaging the scholarly conversation, how you're participating in the exchange with other colleagues. This helps you strengthen the case for the significance of your project if you can help them understand the context. Make it sound interesting. Our panelists are often reading 40 applications. They will give your application more attention if you intrigue them. Make them want to know the answers to the questions you're asking. On the other hand, you know that I do one of those. On the other hand, don't oversell it. They will not be convinced by your claim that your project is solving all problems in the humanities. But make them want to know what you're doing. If it is a less known person or movement, you may need to explain why this is important. The most intriguing projects pose important questions, use unique research materials, and have a fresh, interesting approach to their topic. If you are revising your dissertation, and we see lots of dissertation revision projects, tell us what is new about the project. We don't want to support just I'm getting some more pictures and finish the index. Tell us how you're moving beyond the dissertation and making this into a new project. So tell us what you're doing here that is new. Be clear about what you're going to do during the grant period, and we talked about this here at this table. This is what we call work plan. Tell us what you're going to do during the grant period and how it's going to contribute to doing the work. The more specific, the better. I'm going to spend 6 months in libraries is not convincing. It's going to sound like a fishing expedition. Saying I'm going to spend the second month of my fellowship in the Macon papers at the Baltimore Public Library, I talk to the librarians in there, I know what's in the collection, will be really, really impressive to the reviewers. Now, we're not going to hold you to that. If you lay out a work plan in your application, it's inevitable it's going to change as your project changes, right? But talking in as specific a way as possible about what you're going to do gives your evaluators confidence that you know what you're doing and you know how it's going to happen. You know what has to be done to bring the project to completion. So again, this is about making the case. It is about giving them confidence that you know what's going on. And so, even if you say, I'm going to spend the fellowship period, 12-month fellowship period writing, which is fine, it'd be really helpful to say, I'm going to spend the first 2 months writing chapter 3, which is about this, and the second 2 months writing chapter 4, which is about this. Some level of specificity is helpful. Be realistic. Remember that your reviewers are fellow scholars who write books, and you cannot convince them you're going to write 3 books in a year grant period. Think carefully about the audience or audiences for the application. There are a couple of different audiences. The first are the peer reviewers. So these are the people who are the subject matter specialists. So say, for instance, we might have an East Asia panel, which would have somebody whose applications ranging from ancient to modern China and applications from Japan and Korea. So the panel is going to be made up of an ancient Chinese historian and a Japanese literature person and someone who's doing contemporary Korean history and someone else who's doing, I don't know, something else. So that means you're going to have somebody in the panel who is a specialist in your field. Might not know everything about the topic, but they're a specialist in your field. You need to persuade that person that you know what you're doing to demonstrate you know the literature, for instance. On the other hand, there's going to be other people in that room who know a little bit about your topic but don't know the details. They need to be persuaded that what you're doing is important. Not necessarily to them, but to somebody. You got that distinction? They need to see this is going to be a significant project to somebody. So that means that you may need to be able to explain your project to a non-specialist. This is hard, but it's really important, because the next review stages, when it gets to the staff and the National Council, are people like myself who are broadly educated in the humanities, but may not know as much about Asian studies as the panelists do, but need to be able to understand, this looks like a really important book. I'm not sure I would use it in my scholarship, but I can see how somebody else would. So you need to be able to manage sort of different audiences, both the specialists and the generalists. You're convincing the specialists that you know what you're doing, and the generalists that what you're doing is important, even if it is not theirs. Be careful in that context about jargon, because not everybody's going to know the specific language of your field. So if you're using a phrase that not everybody knows, or a word that not everybody knows, you might need to explain it. The Sultanate application got a little weedy on occasion. And I frankly lost track a little bit of some of the language myself. So be thoughtful about the words that you use, just so it's clear to somebody who's not a specialist what you're doing. This is a good place when you're talking about the audience, again, to address the criteria. Explain to the reviewers why what you're doing is significant, that you're the right person to do it, that your method makes sense, that your method will work, and it's going to reach the audiences. So keep those criteria in mind. If possible, explicitly address them. Balance abstraction and precision. We've asked you when we talk about significance to make some broad claims about why what you're doing is important. And some of those may be very broad indeed. That can get to be a little confusing to somebody who doesn't understand what you're doing. That's sometimes where it's really helpful to have an example. In the music application that had you all read, the story about the University of Michigan Jazz Band gave you a sense of why this was important, right? It gave you a little hook to hang on to. I thought that was really, really powerful. So some example gives you a sense of how your argument is going to work. Show your evaluators that you know what you're doing. Show them you know your topic, show them you know the literature on your topic, and you know what your sources are. Finally, and this is hard, it's hard for all human beings, particularly for scholars, anticipate the questions that they're going to raise and answer them ahead of time. If you've been working on a project for a while, you know where the pitfalls are. And so be prepared to address those. So they may ask, why is she using these case studies? So you might want to sort of be prepared to talk a little bit about why this is the right case study. Or they may ask, can he finish this in this time period? Be able to explain what you're going to be doing during that time period to bring it to a conclusion. So anticipate those issues and find ways to address them ahead of time. Now, money. The individual grants we've been talking about, the fellowships and summer stipends, they are a fixed amount of money that just comes to you on a regular basis. It's all complicated, but it's... The other projects, documentary films, museums, preservation and access, etc., they require a budget. You need to put in a document specifying how much money you need or want and how you're going to spend it. Don't let this scare you, but pay attention to this. Our website includes guidelines about preparing a budget. There are sample budgets, etc. They will tell you what can be funded, what cannot be funded. The most important thing to do, administrator types, is talk to your administrator ahead of time. Talk to the grant officer in your campus as soon as you're thinking about working on a project. Because your institution is going to have rules about how much a budget should include, how salaries get paid, indirect costs, all this kind of stuff that none of us pay attention to except for them. They're going to be the ones to submit the application. So talk to them sooner rather than later about this. Do not wait until the last minute before doing that, before submitting your application. Finally, the NEH is a bureaucracy, and as you know from being a university faculty person, bureaucracies pay attention to details. Your application will be stronger if you pay attention to details as well. First of all, draft your application early and get feedback from colleagues. The more outsider eyes you can get on your project, on your draft application, the better. They can say, okay, you're saying something I don't understand, explain this better. Or you're assuming I know something that I don't hear. Or you misspelled that word. Get feedback from people. If you draft it early, it means that you're less likely to have errors in it, and you're less likely to get caught up in getting your application in late. As I said, program officers will read drafts for all the big grants, so they're not for fellowships and summer stipends. Be sure your bibliography is up to date. We ask for a one-page bibliography. Obviously, this does not include all the scholarship you're drawing on in your project. The bibliography's purpose is to help make a case for your project, to show that you know what the important materials are for the project, particularly important secondary literature that you should be addressing. So the bibliography says, I'm up to date with what's going on in this field. Bibliographies are only really problems if there's nothing on there since 1975. Because that, and we see that sometimes, but that suggests that the applicant has not read anything since graduate school. You want to avoid that. So make sure your bibliography is up to date. If the application requires supporting materials like samples or some other documents, make sure that they are there. Proofread. You do not want your wonderful application to be caught up in silly spelling errors. You'd be surprised by the typos we can get. I've been astonished by the number of applications I've got where the application includes the marginal comments, the track changes bits. People submit those to us, and that sort of suggests to us they're not being very careful, which makes us wonder about the application itself, right? If you're sending us an application, send us an application written for the NEH. I have seen applications saying, I'm applying for a fellowship from the ACLS. So just make sure you're sending us the right stuff. If you're applying for one of the programs that requires reference letters, discuss your application with them ahead of time. As we said earlier, the reference letters can help you make a case for the significance of your project. They can be there, the ones to say, I know the field, and this project will be really, really important. It's going to change the scholarship in this way. So help you by giving them a draft and discussing them with ahead of time. As I said earlier, if you are doing an interdisciplinary project, for instance, something combining literature and art, be really, really keen to get a review or get a reference from those two fields, because that then helps us understand how this interdisciplinarity is going to work. Okay. If you get turned down, reapply. Remember the level of competition. Do not take it seriously. Don't take it personally. This is not a rejection of you. It might be some questions about your project. It is not a rejection of you. It is not saying you're a horrible person, your project is horrible. It simply means this time around we couldn't support it. So if you get turned down, reapply. If you do get turned down, even if you do get funded, request the reviewer's comments. As I said earlier, our reviewers write comments before and after discussion. They are incredibly generous. They engage our applications very seriously, and I'm impressed by how much they have to say and how useful, how seriously they take it and how useful their comments are. We share those comments with applicants, in part because of governmental transparency, but also because we see this as a service to the fields to get a set of comments from 4 or 5 really smart people on the applications. So when you get the notification about your grant, your application, successful or unsuccessful, there'll be information there about how to request the comments. I urge you to do so. If you've been successful, hooray, but the comments will be helpful to you as you develop the project out. If you're not successful, they can help you think about how you might write a better application the next time around. Because they may say, she needs to look at this area of scholarship to strengthen this up. Or they may say, his work plan isn't convincing. If he did more of that, I would be much more comfortable, much more confident in this. Now, frankly, every now and then we'll get some comments that aren't particularly useful. And you can feel free to ignore those. But do take seriously the comments that you get. Feel free, after getting that notification, to contact the program officer. So if you get some comments back and you're confused about what they mean, give us a line, give us a call, and we'll take a look and see if we can help you interpret what's going on. Our experience is that resubmissions are more likely to be successful the second time around. Now, in part, that's because a project has proceeded a little further on, it's developed a little bit, but also because often the applicant has taken a look at comments and has strengthened up their argument. Finally, I will say once again, if you've got questions, call us or write us. We want to be useful to you. We want to support your work. We want to be supporting excellent work, and we want to help you write a good application. So we've got about a half an hour or so. You don't have to stick around if you want, but I'll be here till 6. I'm happy to answer whatever questions come up. And Kate's got the microphone.
Thank you so much for all of this.
Sure.
I did not get an NEH after last April's application process, and I wrote right away to say I would love the comments, and received a response right away that I would get them in about 8 to 10 weeks. Then we had a government shutdown. So now we're in the middle of February.
Right.
Should I be concerned that I have not yet received
You should not,
comments?
because we've only been back at work 3 weeks.
Okay.
I'm hoping that we will get comments out before the next fellowship deadline, because we see that as being really, really important. Unfortunately, in our office, we've had the person who usually does that has retired. The new person should be hired within days, but we'll get that out as soon as we can. So please don't be concerned, we're working on it.
So when you resubmit, is it better to ask different recommenders, or is it okay to just ask the same recommenders if you know the recommendation?
Unless the comments give you some reason to think that there was something wrong there, I don't see any reason to change. We will edit the comments to take anything that the recommenders say out, because those are meant to be confidential. But as long as there's nothing in the comments that say this was shot down by the recommenders, I don't think there's a real reason to worry about that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you to the panelists as well. I just wanted you to comment on an interesting, perhaps minor trend that I noticed. I noticed that when it was being read by non-specialists, then the application that had the broadest kind of public relevance seemed to get the highest rating. So when you're putting together panels of specialists, what you described, when you said an East Asian application will have a Japan person, Korea, China, is this typical of all fields, or do you tend to have greater depth in certain fields, i.e. more specialized eyes might look at, say, an American history application than a Tibetan Buddhist application?
Very good question. I mean, it is true that because of the number of applications we get, we will have like 4 panels in American history. And that's just simply the number of applications we get. You've identified an important dynamic, and one that we are aware of. And so if we get in an Asian studies panel, we get an application that is clearly a project designed for specialists, and the panelists, being more generalist, might have marked it down a little bit. in staff review, we may say, but that specialist was really, really sold on that, and we need to listen to what that specialist had to say. And so we do try to adjust for that dynamic. My general sense is that the projects that tend to be most successful are either sort of broad projects that have a clear, maybe not deep significance, but sort of a broad audience, or a project that is going to be incredibly transformative for a small cohort. And we love to see those, and those do indeed get support. And we do find ways to deal with that in the kind of situation you're describing. Is that helpful?
Very helpful.
Good, good.
Hi, my question, thank you so much for being here. It was really interesting. And my question has to do with methods and structure. So I'm seeing that the structure is different depending in the three samples that you gave us. I was wondering if it would be better to have, like the American music sample gave and highlighted background, rationale, and then methods, materials, contribution to scholarship. Is that a better structure than the other two that don't really follow that same structure, or what would you suggest?
As someone who reads a lot of these things, I find that first outline really, really helpful.
Okay.
My experience of applications is to start with this is why this is important, and then this is how I'm going to get there, is really, really helpful. The project, the Sultanate project, devotes huge amounts of time to a chapter outline, like 2/3, which frankly I found less helpful. Okay. So if the first criterion is significance, it's really helpful to know why this is going to be important, particularly if it's not a field I personally know, to be able to be told, here's where the field is at, and here's how I'm going to connect to this, gives me, at the very beginning, an understanding of how this is going to work and why this is going to be important. So I think the outline as you described, as is demonstrated in that American music application, for me, I find really, really helpful. The other thing that is helpful, actually the other thing that is not helpful, is sometimes I will get an application that will give a lot of context at the beginning, but does not say until half or third way through what the project actually is. So, even if, have an opening sentence saying, I'm going to be writing about American music during the Cold War, and then, here's the sort of the context of this, and this is what the project is going to be, as opposed to having to wait until I get a third of the way through to know what they're doing. I find that to be a little frustrating because I have no idea what they're doing. Anything else? Okay, so you have my card out there. You have the contact info here. If you have questions, please do contact me. I am happy to answer questions, and I can get you to the right person if I don't know the answer myself. I've got a few minutes before my dinner reservation, so I'm going to sort of hang out here, happy to talk with you one-on-one. Otherwise, good wishes for your work. Thank you for your hospitality.
Thank you so much, Dan, for traveling here and hosting this event and meeting so many of our faculty to discuss their research. I also want to thank our review panelists and my colleagues at the Oregon Humanities Center who made this happen today. Scheduling conflicts prevented representatives from Oregon Humanities from being here today, but they requested that I inform you about a grant workshop and gathering with funders and partners tomorrow at the Eugene Public Library. Details are on the Oregon Cultural Trust website. And I really hope you enjoyed the event today and are leaving with new insight and thoughts on how to craft your proposals for NEH funding. I'm so grateful for your participation and look forward to working with each and every one of you on future proposals. Please join me once again in thanking Dan Sack and our reviewers, and have a lovely evening.